Angus graduated from Dartmouth College and University of Virginia Law School, and worked as staff attorney for Pine Tree Legal Assistance in Skowhegan before being chief counsel to the U.S. Senate Subcommittee on Alcoholism and Narcotics in the office of then Senator William Hathaway. Angus returned to practice law in Brunswick with the law firm of Smith, Lloyd, and King, and then began his 18-year career as host and co-producer of Maine Watch on MPBN. Angus became vice president of Swift River Haslund, an alternative energy development company in Portland and Boston, founded in 1989 Northeast Energy Management, a developer of large-scale energy conservation projects in Maine. And as governor, Angus, one of his well-known feats was the Maine Learning Technology Initiative of laptop computers for every Maine public middle school student, the first of its kind in the U.S. And our third candidate, Charlie Summers, was elected Maine Secretary of State in 2010. Charlie received an associate's degree from Blackhawk Community College and a bachelor's degree from the University of Illinois in Urbana-Champaign. Charlie is married to Ruth Summers and father of 3 children, Chaz, Tricia, and Thomas. In 1990, Charlie was the first Republican ever elected to represent Maine's 31st Senate District, which includes Scarborough, Old Orchard Beach, Saco, and Dayton. After 2 terms, Charlie left to become Senator Olympia Snow's state director and held that position from 1995 to 2004. He was appointed New England Regional Administrator of the Small Business Administration in 2005 and was named one of the nation's most influential people in SBA lending. Charlie's been a member of the U.S. Navy Reserve since 1996. In 2007, was called for active duty and deployed to Iraq. On his return, he founded Thomas & Associates, a consulting business that assists business in seeking financing. A year later, he was again called for active duty, this time being deployed to Afghanistan, where he became assistant to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Charlie was awarded the Army Combat Action Badge for his service in Afghanistan. Very briefly, what's going to happen next in terms of the question and answers. Each candidate will give a 3-minute opening statement. I'll be doing the timing and try to keep people on track during the morning. This will be recorded today. USM's AV staff, who I thank for their work, will record the entire debate for multiple audio and video uses. We also have some TV and radio networks here as well. If you have questions for the candidates, some of you have already been writing them on index cards. There will also be students who will collect them during the debate, and Jeff Marks, our executive director, and Brooke Barnes here will be getting the cards, screening them somewhat so I don't get a mass of cards, and then they'll sneak them up to me, and I'll try to ask some of the questions from the audience toward the end of the debate. I ask, please, that people do not applaud or boo or make noises during the Q&A process or opening, and at the end of the closing statements, I'll ask the audience to give their appreciation to the candidates. So I ask everybody to be respectful of each other and the candidates, and I will be respectful of them, although I reserve the right to be a little pushy as well. I've warned each of the candidates that I reserve the right to follow up on some of their answers if I feel the need to. After the 3-minute openings, we will launch into questions, and again, to keep it fair and balanced, the sequence of answering will change each round, so that after the opening statements, the first person to answer the first question will be Charlie Summers, Cynthia will then go, and then Angus in that round, and it will switch to the next round. There will be 2 interactive rounds where candidates will be able to ask questions of each other, and as I have explained to them, they don't get to all pick on one candidate. Again, it'll be, for example, Angus King will ask Charlie, Charlie will ask Cynthia, Cynthia will ask Angus, and then later in the debate, that second time, it will rotate, so they'll ask a question of a different candidate. My goal is to make this as interactive as possible, and ultimately for the public who is here or who will watch or hear this, to learn as much as possible from the candidates and to give them the opportunity to explain their views as much as possible. There will be 2-minute closing statements from each candidate, and then we will close the debate, and the candidates can be here to mingle with people afterwards, and please feel free to do so. I think I have covered everything, and so without further ado, the first Opening statement will be from Angus.
Jeff, thank you. Before I begin, a really big deal happened in Maine last week in terms of energy, and I want to acknowledge it. Chris Sauer is sitting down there in about the fourth row. The ORPC in Eastport is the first ocean energy project in the Americas to put power to the grid. They connected to the grid last week at the Eastport Tidal Power Project, and that's a big deal, and I want to thank Chris. He's a hero, and perseverance was part of the deal, and that's a great accomplishment, and it's one that really puts Maine on the map in terms of ocean energy. When we were sitting in those meetings up in Augusta, Chris, I'm sure you had your doubts as whether or not there'd ever be power flowing, but that's terrific. Energy and the environment, inextricably linked, and I want to talk a bit about energy, and I'm sure we'll get to it today in some detail, but just in a quick outline. It seems to me that the energy situation as it connects to the environment is all about emissions and about extraction of energy. And fortunately, and I'm not talking in detail about this, natural gas gives us an opportunity to do something both on the economic side of energy use and also on the environmental side. The first energy source we need to develop is efficiency and conservation. That's the first fuel. That's the cheapest, it's the low-hanging fruit, and there's enormous opportunity in order to diminish energy use, both in transportation and in our homes. And one of the issues in homes is where does the capital come from to make the investments for energy efficiency? And I think that's one of the challenges that we need to talk about as a society, and how to do that. And there are various creative programs across the country. Natural gas is America's second chance. The price of natural gas today, which is predicted to stay at very low levels for the next 10 to 20 years, gives us an unparalleled opportunity to get off of oil, to get off of coal, and to lower the price of everything in our society, particularly in manufacturing. It's a chance for us to regain a competitive advantage. Natural gas today in the U.S. is something like $2.63 an MCF. In China, it's $17. In Europe, it's $13. That's an enormous differential that gives us a comparative advantage. The danger, however, is that we not become so dependent on natural gas that we're like we are now on oil, and therefore we have to continue to invest in renewables and in the development of renewables, and particularly renewables in Maine, where we have the resources, whether it's in the ocean, on shore in terms of wood, biomass, wind, solar. So that's the sort of big picture, but they're inextricably linked, because most of the air problems in this country come from either transportation or power plants. And if we can go toward electrification of vehicles or natural gas-driven vehicles, and electrification and generation of electricity through gas and renewables, we can make a huge dent in the output of CO2 to the atmosphere, and also in the economic competitiveness of America.
Thank you. Charlie Summers.
Jeff, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here this morning. I appreciate the chance to get up and spend a little time discussing not just energy issues, but issues as they affect our country in terms of our national debt, our national spending, our foreign policy. These are all issues that the next United States Senator will have to deal with, and have to deal with very, very quickly. I think when you consider the fact that our nation, I believe, is on an unsustainable path in terms of its debt, in terms of its spending $1 trillion a year more than it's taken in over the last 4 years, and piling debt on top of an already $16 trillion debt, it's going to be a very, very difficult and important session for the future of this country when the next Congress convenes. That's the reason I've gotten in this race. In my introduction that Jeff offered, you mentioned that I have 3 children. I have a 28-year-old, a 24-year-old, and a 3-year-old. And when I look at my two older children, and particularly my youngest one, Thomas, is, like I mentioned, 3, I question whether or not he will have the same opportunities that I had as a young boy. He will have the same bright future, the opportunity to excel and do well and participate in our country. If we continue down the path that we are on right now, I'm not so sure that that will happen. I think that the next senator is going to have to be willing to stand up and address issues not just as they pertain to energy, but as they pertain to energy and our national defense. When you consider that our country is importing oil every single day from the Middle East and in effect paying the people that we are fighting against, I think that that is both inherently wrong, morally wrong. We need to be looking for energy sources here in the United States, whether it's oil, whether it's clean coal, whether it's nuclear power, whether it's alternative energy. I think that the government has got to not be in the business of funding energy projects that cannot stand on their own 2 feet, because the American public cannot and should not support that. I think that we need to do everything we can to foster an environment where the private sector can work to make sure that these, whether they're alternative energy or whether it's clean coal, nuclear power, that they can be deployed and used in an efficient way, in a way that protects our environment, in a way that offers economic opportunity and jobs in this country. And that, I believe, is a critical reason I'm in this race, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thank you very much. And Cynthia?
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I am the only candidate in this race with legislative experience and policymaking experience that is leading Maine to energy independence. As a state legislator, I'm proud of my work voting for and working on legislation that has led to a number of great things here in Maine. The Efficiency Maine Trust, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, otherwise known as RGGI, the recycling of consumer products, the Kids Safe Products Act, as well as a pesticide notification statute. Those are real policies that I worked on and voted for that are moving Maine in the right direction. I've also been a champion of environmental and energy issues on the defense, standing up against a harmful takings bill, as well as voting against and speaking out against the open pit mining bill that was introduced in the last legislature. I'm proud of my 100% rating from the conservation voters, and you can be assured that as Maine's United States Senator, I will continue in my current path of advocating for and protecting Maine's environment as well as renewable energy. I'm also the only candidate on the stage that is wearing green shoes in honor of today's event, and I would just like that to be noted. This is an incredibly important election. There's a lot at stake, and there are clearly choices among the candidates. And I believe that I'm the strongest candidate for Maine's renewable future. I'm proud of the Obama administration's work towards leading us to higher fuel efficiency standards. I think the Clean Cars work on the part of the Obama administration is something we should all be proud of, and you can be assured that I will work with the President and the Democrats in the United States Congress to make sure that we continue on the path towards clean cars and higher fuel efficiency, because it's really a great return on our investment. The oldest building in our nation's capital, the Treasury Building, was recently certified, LEED certified. That just demonstrates that we can become a nation that's independent and relies on renewable energy. The Obama administration has increased domestic production of oil and gas more than any administration ever, and at the same time have reduced our carbon footprint. These are things that we can be proud of as Americans, but we have to be vigilant. We need to continue to just work so hard on these issues, because there are forces everywhere trying to keep us on petroleum and our dependence on foreign oil, which does present a national security risk. At the national level as well, there are some real threats, and I'm the only candidate in this race who has openly taken a stand against the Keystone Pipeline. because I believe that tar sands oil is corrosive and will not do anything good for this country except present environmental hazards and unacceptable risks. And I'm the only candidate who's taken a public stand against the Enbridge Corporation's proposed trailbreaker project that could potentially have tar sands oil leading in old pipes past Lake Sebago, as well as the Androscoggin River and other very precious Maine places. So
10 seconds.
I would appreciate you paying close attention to the issues and policy making and legislative records of all the candidates on the stage. I really appreciate your time, and I look forward to today's conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we're going to go right into the Q&A. Some people suggested I give them a nice softball question to start with, but I'm not, sorry. We're going to start with Charlie Summers, followed by Cynthia, then Angus answering the following question, 30 seconds, so it's a short question. Do you accept the scientific consensus that climate change is happening and is being primarily caused by human activities?
No, I don't. I think that humans certainly have an effect on our environment, but I also think there are a lot of other natural factors that would be included. Whether you're talking about volcanic eruptions, whether you're talking about the changes in our atmosphere. It's interesting to think that the United States is in a position where we are trying to not only lead in this area, which I think we need to, but I think we also have to understand that there are natural forces at work here. So I think the whole climate change debate is one that needs to be broadened and not simply focus on what is occurring here in the United States.
Thank you, Cynthia.
The exact opposite of what he said. I believe definitely climate change is happening, and definitely human activity is playing a role. It's one of the biggest challenges we face as society, and we need to collectively come together using science and facts and solve the problems. And there are solutions out there. Maine obviously is leading in achieving those solutions with our attempts at investing in tidal power, solar, and wind, and taking us off petroleum-based fuels that are leading to high levels of carbon in the atmosphere that are causing not only warming, but this crazy weather that we're having. So I'm absolutely convinced that it's the biggest threat to civilized society, and it's something that we can collectively come together and solve.
Thank you, Angus.
You saw me take out my phone and you thought, he's not really texting. What I wanted to show Charlie is a graph of the last million years of CO2. And what you see is that it dinks around between 200 and 250 parts per million for about 1 million years. And then in 1860, at the beginning of the real industrial revolution, it starts to go up like a hockey stick. I don't think anybody can look at this scientific data and come to any other conclusion that something very serious is going on in the atmosphere and that it relates to what we as human beings are doing. Now, what the effect of the increase in concentration in CO2 is a matter for scientific discussion. But I don't think there's any, I don't see how you can possibly avoid the science when we're now at roughly almost two times the level of CO2 in the atmosphere that we've seen for the last 1 million years. Something's going on out there, and we ignore it out there.
Thank you. Okay, next question.
It may actually have something to do with the radiation effect of our political atmosphere there.
Okay, that's fine. I said we want to have this interactive, and we want to keep people awake this morning. So, and I hope it goes uphill from here, not downhill. So, the next question, again, Cynthia will be the first to respond to, is Senator Snowe, who holds the current seat that you each are seeking, has stated that she believes that RGGI, who you mentioned, Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which deals with power plant emissions through a market-based trading system, and just had its, I believe, 17th auction this week, or last week, would be a good model for federal legislation. Do you agree that it could provide a basis for a national approach, or are there other federal approaches that you would support for reduction of greenhouse gas emissions?
I do agree with Senator Snow.
And I'm sorry, I'll give 90 seconds for this answer, please, Ray.
Okay, I do agree, excuse me, I do agree with Senator Snow. I think Reggie has been, is proven to be an excellent model. Not only is it reducing our dependence on carbon and the carbon footprint, but it's also creating money that we can invest in renewable energy and efficiency. If you looked in today's paper, Maine has reduced its dependence on oil from 838 million gallons in 2003 to 189 gallons in 2010. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's because of Reggie, but I'm just suggesting that we are on the path to energy independence, and Reggie, cap and trade, is a smart way to reduce carbon and at the same time generate funds to invest in renewable energy. So I fully support using Reggie as a national model and would definitely work on that as Maine's next United States Senator.
And if I just ask quickly, would you support a tax on carbon emissions?
Yes, I would.
Okay, thank you. Angus?
I think Reggie's a good model because it's market-based. I much prefer a market-based model than a regulatory model. It's more predictable. It relies on the private enterprise kind of motivation, and it's worked in New England. And I think, and it's a bipartisan idea. It has been, or was originally. I'm not sure it is right now, but originally cap and trade was a bipartisan proposal back in the 80s and 90s. But Senator Snow's support, as always, I guess I don't agree with her 100% of the time, but as usually in my case, I agree with her. I think she's right about this one. As far as the carbon tax is concerned, not now, I guess is what I would say. That may be something that we want to consider, but not in the midst of the incredibly fragile economy that we're in right now. It takes 120,000 jobs a month just to absorb new people coming into the workforce. And whenever we're under 120,000 jobs a month, that means we're in a pretty fragile place. And an additional tax on carbon, which would be felt throughout the economy, I just don't think we can do it. I think cap and trade, though, is a good step, makes sense, and I would support it.
Thank you. Charlie?
Sure, I would agree that the carbon tax is certainly not the right direction to take, and I'm not so sure that cap and trade, given the economic situation that we're in, is the right approach to take either. I think that we need to offer incentives to businesses, certainly to become more energy efficient and certainly to make sure that they're good stewards of the environment, but I'm not convinced that the heavy-handed federal government is the right answer in this case.
Thank you. I'm going to move, we're going to stay on energy, but I may be one of the few people in the audience who's actually read the current Republican Party platform, Democratic Party platform, and Angus King's platform, or at least policy on energy. And having read them, they all seem remarkably alike on energy. Both the Republicans and Democrats have an all of the above policy, and Angus King has a Made in America policy. So I'm going to ask, actually, start this round, we start with Angus, I believe. And the question I have for you is, essentially, aren't you the same policy position as the Democrats and Republicans? And if so, are you supporting more development of, you said natural gas, but are you also supporting more development of domestic oil and coal? And if so, how can you support that as well as reducing carbon emissions at the same time?
I don't really support particularly more development of coal. I think the sooner we can get out of the coal business, the better. In terms of oil, I'm not categorical. Don't drill anywhere. I think it has to be on a case-by-case basis where you weigh the environmental cost versus the benefits. I believe that natural gas gives us an opportunity to get off oil much faster than people think. I was thinking about myself. Last spring, Mary and I changed our home from oil to natural gas. It took about a week. And everybody else in Maine has that option that has the pipeline. But the other way to get natural gas to your home for heating is through the wires. gas by wire, using gas to generate electricity, using our existing transportation infrastructure, our electrical transmission and distribution infrastructure, to take that electricity and heat homes by electricity, either through electrothermal storage or electric heat pumps or other technologies, and we can get off of oil. The same thing with electric cars. I recently made a trip to California and had the opportunity to ride in a Tesla all-electric car, 300-mile range, 0 to 60 in 4.5 seconds. A high price, but that's because they're making them essentially one at a time. When they get into mass production, the price will come down. I think the transition away from oil can occur very quickly, and that's why, for example, drilling in Anwar doesn't make sense, because if we approved it tomorrow, it would take 10 years for the oil to flow, and hopefully by that time, we'll be on an entirely different energy path.
Thank you, Charlie.
Well, I mentioned in my opening statement, I think an all of the above approach is certainly the right way to go. I think we have to make sure that we are looking in every nook and cranny, if you will, but we have to remember that our economy, whether we like it or not, is an oil-based economy, and we have to make certain that the working people of this state, people who are looking for jobs now, have the ability to not only have clean, reliable transportation, but also the opportunity for jobs in, I think, fields, whether you're talking about the pipeline out of Canada, whether you're talking about clean coal technology, whether you're talking about nuclear capacity. There's really no reason that the country of France can have as many nuclear reactors as it does, and I understand that they can now recycle their spent nuclear fuel rods on site, that the United States should not be considering all of those options. I think, when you're talking about wind energy, which Governor King is involved in, when you're talking about any of the other alternative forms, those are great, but they need to be able to stand on their own 2 feet. And I don't believe that this country in a 5 or 10 or 15-year period will be able to extricate itself off of oil, particularly if we don't go to places like Anwar and don't bring the pipeline in from Canada. We are not going to be able to do that. We need to have our own energy sources here in the United States. I think we have a moral responsibility to make certain that we are looking within our own borders, because as I mentioned before, every day when we are importing oil from the Middle East, we are paying the people that we're fighting against. And I just don't believe that that is a sound policy, and I don't believe that it is a morally correct policy.
Thank you, Cynthia.
That must be the only similarity between the Republican and the Democratic Party platform that I'm aware of. The platforms between the Democrats and the Republicans are like night and day when it comes to civil rights, when it comes to economic justice, and when it comes to policies that would really move America forward. So I think when it comes to energy, my position is different from the other candidates here today. I think, sure, natural gas seems like a great alternative. It's cheap. It can provide businesses with low energy sources that they need to make their widgets and to move the economy. But the extraction method used for natural gas is not good, and it's not a renewable energy source, and it's not something that we should move to as Plan B. It's certainly on the table and should be used wisely, but it's not the answer or the elixir to our energy problems. What we need is renewable energy that is sourced here in America, that is going to reduce our carbon footprint, have a positive impact on global warming, and not present national security threats that our dependence on oil currently does. So there's clearly a difference between the parties. There's also a difference between the candidates. And I think in terms of, let's talk about a carbon tax, or let's talk about taxes. Taxes are a huge issue in this race, and I am also the only candidate who believes that tax policy is really at the crux of the election. And we need to change tax policy drastically. We need to stop allowing millionaires and billionaires to have tax cuts. We need to stop providing the oil and gas industry with subsidies and the large agricultural companies with subsidies. We need to direct that money to domestic needs. We need to have tax fairness so that the 15% of Maine's families who are living in poverty, the 1 in 5 Maine children who are without food security, have not only the ability to heat their homes, but to have food in their stomachs and a school that they can attend on a regular basis. And so there are definitely differences between the candidates, there's differences between the parties, and it's not only about energy, but it's about energy and a whole lot of other things.
Thank you. And we're going to try to get into some of those other things too. And actually, the candidates are making my job difficult because they're sort of touching on things that I was going to be asking about, but I'm going to try to pull it back together here. And this round, again, we'll start with Charlie. And given the discussion that we just had on this last round, the question is, and there may be some follow-up, so I'll give you fair warning. If you were elected, will you support federal financial incentives or support for domestic energy sources? Oil, coal, natural gas, nuclear, wind, solar, biofuels, or if not all domestic sources and only some, how do you pick which ones you do and which ones you don't support financially? Charlie?
Jeff, if I could ask you what type of financial assistance you're referring to?
Well, it could be subsidies, it could be a production tax credit, it could be an investment tax credit, it could be grants or guaranteed loan programs.
And I think that the, what I mentioned a few moments ago, that our energy sources have to be, particularly given the economic environment and the debt that this country is facing, it has to be something that stands on its own 2 feet. It has to be something that can work today and can provide the energy that this country needs, both in terms of business and in terms of personal. And I think that we're going to have to, as we get to Washington, go through the federal budget and go through it line by line. Whether you're talking about the Department of Energy, whether you're talking about the Department of Defense, whether you're talking about the Department of Education, Agriculture. For example, in agriculture, the subsidies for ethanol. That is, it sounds good, but it drives the cost of food up, particularly for working families. And it takes that food source out of the market and really for an arguably negligible effect. And those are the concerns as we go forward. We have to be willing to look at this and make certain that whatever energy company it is, that whatever source that they're providing is doing so at the cleanest and certainly the most cost-efficient basis.
And if I can just ask you a quick follow-up before Cynthia, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce opposes eliminating oil subsidies. What's your position on oil subsidies?
I think we all know that oil subsidies our oil companies provide jobs, millions of jobs in this country, and if we would change our national policy in terms of looking for oil here in this country to provide more, and if there is a definite cost-benefit analysis of ratio that can be applied to that shows that there are jobs and there are people paying taxes as a result of it, then I think it makes a lot of sense.
Would you apply the same test to renewable energy sources as well?
I just said that a moment ago.
Okay.
I think that's not only saying it was on 2 feet, but there has to be a direct positive effect.
Okay, Cynthia.
Thanks for the question. I support the production tax credits for wind. I think they're really important for our ability to move forward and to gain ground in having wind supply our energy needs. It's a renewable source. It's what Maine has to offer, and so I think it's incredibly important. As you know, it would be one of the first things Maine's next United States Senator votes on, and you can count on me to supporting the continuation of the production tax credits. When it comes to incentives, I disagree that companies have to go it alone and have to stand on their own 2 feet. I think that's the beauty of America, is that we collectively pool our resources and lend money to small entrepreneurs who have ideas and have a vision for the future and have solutions on the horizon, but don't have the capital. I think that's why we exist, that's why we pay taxes, that's we're paying taxes. Obviously, there's balance when it comes to loan guarantees. We certainly don't want to just guarantee loans to entities that could otherwise make the loans themselves, with the result being that we're socializing risks for private profit. I don't think that's a good equation, but there is an appropriate balance, and I do think that government can play a role in leading us to energy independence by making smart investments in ideas and in American people who have solutions and have a long-term strategy, but just need either money or loan guarantees. So we clearly differ, and I certainly don't think that subsidies to large petroleum companies is a jobs program that we should count on. I think that it's high time that subsidies to oil and gas companies be ended. The only reason why they're there in the first place is because they have tremendous lobbying power and clout and are able to rig the system in order to protect their long-term profits. But there's absolutely no reason why huge petroleum companies should be getting subsidies from the American people.
Would you support continuing subsidies for the nuclear industry or not?
No, I would not.
Okay. Angus?
Before getting into the direct answer, I want to commend to you guys a book that just came out called The Silent Green Revolution by Michael Grunwald. It's a study of what has gone on at the Department of Energy since 2009 in terms of funding research and development and the development of alternative technologies. It's really amazing, and most people don't really know what's going on. For example, the grant program that the project I was involved with, Record Hill Wind, you're going to hear a lot about it. It sounded like I'm the only person in the country that got that, and I didn't, frankly. I was out of the project by that time. By the time the grant, I had been bought out by the time the grant was awarded. But those grants under Section 1603 of the statute went to 7,000 different companies in the United States, 37 in Maine. And what's happening out there in terms of research and development is really incredible, and it's important for the country. One just simple example, I don't mean to sound obsessed with natural gas, but the low price of natural gas today is directly related to the development of the hydrofracking technology. And I agree with Cynthia, we got to be careful about how it's done. The people I've talked to and the reading I've done have told me that it can be done safely. It's got to be done right. It should be regulated so that we know what the chemicals are and those kind of things, but it can be done safely. Anyway, that technology was developed using federal subsidies. 20 years of federal subsidies, and the guy who developed it has the odd name of George Mitchell. Not our George Mitchell, but another George Mitchell. But he and the people that work for him have attributed a great deal of their success to federal support of the R&D that was necessary to figure out how to get this gas out of the shale in a safe, environmentally sound way, and it's what's led directly to about a 75 or 80% price reduction, which frankly could end up saving our economy. So, and Charlie has mentioned nuclear power. Nuclear power is one of the most heavily subsidized energy forms there is. The Price-Anderson Act, which essentially says they're free of insurance costs, is in itself a huge subsidy. And I think I heard him say that he's okay with subsidizing the oil business.
What's your position on that?
I don't think it makes sense. I think the subsidies should go to the places where it's an industry that's in development, that is trying to get a niche in the market, and then as it gets more firmly established, the subsidies should go away. I think oil is pretty well established in this country, and it strikes me as sort of odd that those subsidies are still continuing. And the other place I would differ with Charlie, I think he's used the term clean coal a couple of times. I think that's an oxymoron. I mean, the data I've seen, they're trying to work out clean coal, they're trying to figure out clean coal, but the emission level from coal compared with even oil is way higher, and compared with natural gas, it's not even in the same ballpark. So
15 seconds.
So I think the question of subsidies is they should be supporting R&D, they should be supporting new developments and new technologies, and I would rest my case on the experience of hydrofracking, because that could save the American economy, came directly based upon federal R&D funds and the private sector being very creative and energetic in figuring out how to do it.
I'm going to ask one more round of questions before then I'll have you do the interactive round, so just to give you the heads up on that. And on the next question, which we start with Cynthia, answering, yes, Cynthia. We've talked about the all the above or Made in America programs. The question is, in roughly 60, 70 seconds, is do you support or oppose the importation into the U.S. or New England of A, large amounts of hydropower, and B, I know you've already addressed this, but the other candidates will now as well, tar sands oil via pipeline.
There was a bill in the legislature this past session that would have altered the renewable energy portfolio standard that would have allowed large quantities of hydropower to be included, and I oppose that because I think hydropower in Canada is subsidized, and it would create difficulty for main small renewable energy companies like the tidal companies that we put out, like some of the wind companies that are taking off. And so I don't support importing large quantities of hydropower from Canada because it's essentially subsidized by the Canadian government and makes it difficult for main energy producers to compete. I also don't support creating a tar sands pipeline in the middle of the country or through Maine. I feel very strongly about that. I think it's absolutely unnecessary because it will not create the kind of jobs or economic prosperity that we see. It presents a huge environmental risk because of the corrosive nature of tar sands oil and the aging pipe infrastructure, and we don't have the adequate regulatory structure to address some of the risks, and so it's not good, and I don't support it.
Thank you. Angus?
With regard to Hydro-Quebec, my question is, what's the price? If Hydro-Quebec wants us to give, if they walked into this auditorium and said, we'll give you a 20-year fixed price contract at 4.5 cents per kilowatt hour, I'd say, where do I sign? The problem is that's not what they're offering. They've just signed a 28-year deal with Vermont. Nobody knows what's in it because it's secret, but the terms seem to be that it's, quote, market-based, which means as fossil fuel prices rise, it falls, so will the price of the energy. To me, that's no great advantage. Why not just stay with the market? I've met the people from Hydro-Quebec. I like them, but they're not philanthropists. They're business people. And so I think the real question is price. There is a very interesting opportunity, though, with Hydro-Quebec and our wind industry. In Denmark, which is the most heavily winded country in the world in terms of penetration of wind power, they have a deal with Norway where the Norwegian hydropower acts as the battery backup for the wind. And when the wind doesn't blow, they open the dams in Norway, the electricity flows to Denmark, and then vice versa. I think we could do a similar thing. We have a very good wind resource in Maine, particularly offshore, and Hydro-Quebec could be the backup to even out the power supply so that the intermittency of wind, which is one of the criticisms, could be ameliorated. So I think Hydro-Quebec, the other thing you have to remember is they got to get the power here. And it would involve a major new transmission line and the environmental issues there. I'm not necessarily against it. I think it has to be, but we have to ask what are the terms and what's the price.
And just quickly, tar sands.
Tar sands, I'm worried about the Portland pipeline carrying tar sands. I'm just worried about it physically. It's a 40, 50-year-old pipeline, 60 years old, I think. This stuff is hot, it's corrosive, and they had a terrible spill in Kalamazoo, in the Kalamazoo River, and if we had something like that in Sebago Lake, it would be catastrophic. I don't know enough to say categorically no, never, but I would be very reluctant until I had some good scientific data that it was safe. We've been running oil through that pipeline for 60 years and without serious incident, but this one does worry me.
Thank you, Charlie.
Sure, I think, when you consider that the greatest cost, both the greatest cost and the greatest barrier to business development in the state of Maine is the cost of energy, I think that anything that we can do that would bring reliable energy to our manufacturing base, to our small businesses, is a good thing. And if Hydro-Quebec offers energy that is reasonable and cheap, then I think that we have a responsibility to consider that and certainly do it. I think in terms of tar sands, we also have a responsibility to use every energy source that we have in this country in a reasonable and efficient and in a manner that will certainly protect our environment. But I don't think that we can simply walk away from that.
Thank you. We now have the candidate question and candidate round, and by chance and coincidence, it's going to go sequentially, sort of as you see them. Angus can ask a question to Charlie, Charlie of Cynthia, Cynthia of Angus. You can try to keep your questions not too long and roughly about 60 seconds for each answer. So, Angus.
I didn't really prepare anything, but listening this morning, I think my question to Charlie would be, are you serious about nuclear power?
Well, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, when you consider the United States Navy has had nuclear reactors for almost 65 years and never had an accident, there's no reason in the world that we can, with the technology that exists today, do so in a reasonably and environmentally safe atmosphere. I think that when you consider that nuclear power is probably one of the most efficient forms of power that we can have, and you know, again, Angus, I go back to the Middle East and an area where I spent a lot of time, and you know, you consider that you know, we're currently paying the people that we're fighting against. I think we have a moral obligation to look at every energy resource or opportunity that we have.
Thank you. Charlie, you now get to ask Cynthia a question.
Sure. I would say that my question would be focused around Afghanistan. Do you support the President's timetable on removing troops from Afghanistan?
Because that has so much to do with energy and the environment. Yes, I do. I do support the President.
Thank you. Cynthia, you can ask a question of Angus now.
Angus, in the newspaper, you were quoted as supporting the Keystone XL pipeline as long as the environmental rules were complied with. And my question to you is, did the newspaper report that accurately?
I'm not categorically opposed to pipelines, and I think it's an environmental issue. And I know that there are people who say we shouldn't allow the pipeline because it allows the tar sands oil to get out. We don't like the tar sands oil. I think that's Canada's call. I don't think that's our call. And if we say, well, we're not going to let any pipelines out of Canada, they'll just run a pipeline west of Vancouver themselves. So I think the idea of sort of trying to trap the tar sands oil, and I'm not an advocate of the tar sands oil, but I just don't think that's a proper use of environmental policy. I think it's up to the people of the states where the pipeline would go to make those decisions based upon good environmental policy. And I think that the federal government should, they have jurisdiction over the border crossing, and we should be sure that the standards are met. But and I'm not an advocate for the pipeline, but where I know there are certain people in Congress that say we ought to just build it, no permits, no nothing. I certainly don't agree with that. I think it needs to be permitted. The question I have about the pipeline is, what does it do for us? If the pipeline simply runs through the U.S. to the Gulf, where the oil would go on to ships and go to China or somewhere else, then I'm not sure there's much in it for the U.S. The same thing goes for the pipeline through Maine, the Trailbreaker project. It really wouldn't do much for Maine. It would go through Maine and go into tankers in Portland Harbor, and they would go elsewhere. So I don't see it as an advantage to Maine necessarily, or necessarily to the United States, but I think we're going down a dangerous path when we use environmental policy for reasons other than protecting the environment in the United States.
Thank you. Going back to my questions, Charlie, I'm going to start with you. Gasoline prices are relatively high in the U.S. right now, although the U.S. has some of the lowest taxes on petroleum of any developed country. As U.S. Senator, do you have a strategy to lower prices, or should government stay out of the pricing of gasoline?
I think I've already touched on my strategy, and that would be to look for oil here in the United States. It would not only, and you know, Angus had mentioned, even if we drilled in Anwar, it would be 10 years before we saw the oil. Well, if we had drilled in Anwar 10 years ago, we would see the oil today. And you know, I think that simply because there is somewhat of a lag in the process. There's no reason in the world that we should not only be drilling for oil, but building new refineries in this country that would not only provide oil for us, provide jobs. And I think that if we do those things and begin to look within and do so in an environmentally responsible way, we can not only provide more oil and more energy, but we can certainly lower the price.
Thank you, Cynthia.
My husband was complaining this morning that he didn't fill up his car a couple of days ago because the price of gas went up like 25 cents in 1 week. And so it's clearly an issue that's on people's minds, but the reality is it's not something necessarily that's controlled by United States policy. It's an international market, and we're unfortunately not able to control the price of gas, but we certainly can spend less on gas by encouraging higher fuel efficiency, and that's what the Clean Cars regulations recently issued will do, and that's something I clearly support. Energy efficiency will reduce our spending on gas. There was a provision in the Simpson-Bowles agreement that would call for an gas tax as part of the revenue mix, and I'm on the record as I'm willing to explore that. I think that when we buy gasoline, the price we pay should reflect the true cost and not be subsidized unfairly. And so I think talking about carbon taxes and gasoline taxes, while unpleasant in a fragile economy, is perhaps the responsible thing to do if what we're going to be trying to do is become energy independent, reduce our carbon footprint and our reliance on fossil fuels.
Thank you. Angus.
Jeff, it's a really serious issue, and it's a really serious issue in Maine. We're now approaching, as I looked today, about $4 a gallon. Just to put it in perspective in terms of what those numbers mean, for every $1 increase in gasoline or home heating oil, they move in step in Maine, it's $1 billion out of the Maine economy. We're shipping almost $5 billion a year, which is like 12% of the Maine economy, out of state every year. If it goes up 10 cents, you can easily drive by 10 cents. That's $100 million that's evaporated out of the Maine economy. So it's a really serious problem. I don't believe in price controls. I think that never works. It always pops out somewhere else. I think there are several opportunities, though. One is we all, as individuals, have opportunities to buy vehicles that get better mileage. And that's where you can lower your own gas price. And of course, some people can't because they have to drive trucks and the like. But the best way to bring those prices down is to develop alternatives and competition. And once we start seeing electric vehicles and natural gas powered vehicles, we're going to see the price of oil drop because the demand is going to drop. I don't think the drilling in the U.S. In terms of worldwide demand, ANWR, and the total capacity of ANWR is estimated to be about 90 days of world oil supply if you pump it dry. And I just don't think the output is worth the risk. It's a worldwide commodity. Nothing much we do here in terms of drilling is going to change the price of oil. The best thing we can do is try to find substitutes as quickly as we can. And that involves alternative energy sources in Maine, it involves natural gas, and it involves getting us off of oil. The best way to save money on oil is to not buy it in the first place.
I'm going to ask this next round will be a 30-second sort of quick question. Maybe the question will be longer than the answers, but sort of try for a yes or no type answer. 2 weeks ago, the U.S. Department of Transportation announced fuel efficiency standards. So I wanted to ask this question and follow up on the car issue. To increase average fleet-wide mileage requirements for light-duty vehicles, 54 miles per gallon by 2025. Senator Olympia Snowe was positive about the announcement. Governor Mitt Romney criticized the new fuel standards as being extreme and reducing vehicle choices. I want to ask each candidate, starting with Cynthia, do you support or oppose the new fuel efficiency standards, and if you were senator?
Oh, absolutely support, without a doubt.
Angus?
Yes, I got 30 seconds. Quick story. I remember a lobbyist in Augusta in the 70s telling me that pop tops were impossible on beer cans. We wanted to ban them because they remember the old ones, you'd pull them off and people would step on them. They said, oh, it's impossible to do it so that you don't have to pull them off. Well, we passed the law and they figured out how to do it. You improve the efficiency standards, and lo and behold, miraculously, the automobile industry is going to figure out how to meet them. They can meet them now. They've just been improved for the first time in like 25 years, and it's worked, and it's going to work, and of course we should do it. I don't know what Governor Romney's thinking.
Charlie?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. That was succinct. And I appreciate that. Now you get 90 seconds on the next one, and we'll start with Angus in answering it. I'm switching a little bit of topics now. We're going to go to the Clean Air Act and federal environmental regulations. That's also received a fair amount of attention in both the party platforms and among candidates. For many decades, Congress has debated the scope of federal environmental laws and regulations like the Clean Air Act and the Endangered Species Act. In the last 2 to 3 years, the Senate has voted several times on, for example, eliminating or revising some Clean Air Act rules such as mercury standards for power plants and rules about pollutants traveling interstate lines, crossing state lines. If you were Maine senator, would you vote for or against either elimination of or revision to Clean Air Act rules such as the mercury standards and pollution limitations, and why? Angus?
Generally, no, but I don't see how, given the nature of your question, I can give a definitive answer because I don't know what the amendments will be. There might be strengthening amendments, so I'd vote for them. If you're talking about gutting the Clean Air Act, absolutely not. I mean, the Clean Air Act has, I'd be going too far to say sacred status for Maine people, but it's pretty darn important to us because the father of the Clean Air Act was Ed Muskie of Maine, and it was one of the most courageous and far-reaching and far-seeing political acts of the 20th century. So we shouldn't tamper with it willy-nilly. On the other hand, I believe that regulations passed pursuant to any law should be reviewed, hopefully by the Congress, to be sure that the regulations comport with the intent of the law. I think that's a reasonable provision. We passed a law that required that in my first year in office as governor, and I think it's worked pretty well here in Maine. If an agency in Maine passes a new regulation that's substantive and important, it has to go back to the legislature to be sure there's congruence. So it's hard to answer categorically, Jeff. Am I in favor of weakening the Clean Air Act? Absolutely not. But I can't give a categorical answer on a bill or an amendment or a regulation that I haven't seen. I do know that one of the provisions of the Clean Air Act that was very important was that they grandfathered Midwestern power plants because they thought they were going to be replaced in a few years, and therefore they had a higher emissions ability. And here we are 40 years later, and these plants are still operating, they've been repowered, and they're continually trying to avoid a new source review. I think that those rules ought to be applied to those power plants, because you know what? We get the bad air, we're at the end of the tailpipe. And so that's a place where I think they should continue to be tough. And generally speaking, I support the Clean Air Act, subject to, if there are reasonable amendments, I'll call them as I see them when they come down the road.
Thanks, Charlie.
Jeff, would you repeat that again?
Sure. It's a tough question. There have been calls for essentially either strengthening or weakening Clean Air Act regulations. So the U.S. Senate has had bills to eliminate, for example, or dilute provisions such as mercury standards for power plants or limitation of pollutants crossing state lines. And the question was how you would vote on such proposals as those if they come up again in the next legislative session of Congress, or any other related efforts to essentially dilute or eliminate provisions existing in the Clean Air Act.
Right. No, I support the Clean Air Act. I think it was important legislation, and let's face it, we all breathe the same air and drink from the same water supply, and we have a responsibility, not just as Mainers, but certainly as Americans, to make sure that those provisions are protected. And yeah, I think it's critically important to be willing to look and see if there are ways to update and even strengthen. But to eliminate the Clean Air Act, no.
Okay, Cynthia?
I would oppose any effort to eliminate or dilute attempts to regulate mercury or cross-border pollution. I think those are critically important issues. The game in Washington about the Environmental Protection Act is that the regulatory body is deprived of the enforcement power through tricks in the Senate. And so the senator from Maine needs to be very careful that budget amendments don't defund the agency so that they can't enforce the rules. But I'm a strong proponent of the Clean Air Act and would take every step I can. And I'm proud of the fact that for the first time ever under the Obama administration, there are regulations that relate to the emissions from these kinds of power plants. And that's something that I support, and I think it's incredibly important that we support the president in the next election, because he is the person who is leading us towards the appropriate regulation of mercury in the environment and other pollutions that are giving all of our kids here in Maine asthma and causing all kinds of health problems across the country.
Thank you. Charlie, you're next up on this next round, and will be, again, a shorter Q&A generally. We've had some discussion, not my questions, but some of the discussions today about energy efficiency. Should the federal government be supporting loan or R&D or other programs promoting efficiency? And if so, what type? And if not, why not?
Well, I think that, you know, again, I'll go back to some of the things I said earlier. Energy efficiency programs, if what we're doing is trying to pass a program or do something that is sort of feel-good legislation that ends up costing the taxpayer, ends up causing more and more subsidies to energy schemes that don't pan out, that can't hook into the grid, that if, for example, the federal support of it was taken away, it would not exist. You know, in Kansas right now, the federal government is paying wind energy companies not to produce wind energy because they're finding that it's too expensive. And you know, when you look at what the United States Navy has been ordered to do in terms of having green energy on ships, I think it sounds good, it makes you feel good, but on these Navy ships, my understanding is the fuel is about 4 or 5 times more expensive than the current fuel that they're using. And when you consider the economic climate that we are in, to simply pass feel-good legislation so that one of us can come home and thump our chest and tell everybody that we did something, when in fact all we did was go deeper and deeper into their wallet, that is not the right approach to take. And I think that you know, we have to look at what we're doing and look at the far-reaching effects of whatever program it may be, and ask ourselves if in fact it does not only reduce our dependence on you know, unclean energy or foreign oil, but does it actually do what it's purported to do? I mean, those are the questions that need to be answered. And I think that, you know, again, it's great to have slogans here and slogans there, but you know, the fact of the matter is we are spending $1 trillion more a year than we are taking in, and we're going to have a very, very serious look at those budget constraints.
Thank you. Cynthia?
I certainly support loans to communities for renewable energy projects. I mean, obviously, whenever we're talking about the allocation of American resources, we have to be on high alert. There has to be transparency and accountability at every step, and we have to make sure that the money that we're lending out is repaid and that it's being properly invested. And I'll just give you a small example on the state scale. Anyone here been to Scratch Bakery in South Portland? It's in my district. It's a fabulous small business. It's the hub of a bustling little neighborhood, makes great bakery products. Well, they, through the Efficiency Maine Trust, got a loan to put solar panels on the roof of their bakery, and it's substantially reduced the cost of heating the water to make the bagels. And so they've repaid the loan. They have solar power. It's a tremendous way to circulate our tax money through communities with the oversight and programs that the government can provide. That, to me, is why we have government. That's the appropriate role of government. And so I support lending money to companies so that they can use the money in a way to make their buildings more efficient, because ultimately it serves the communities, it makes them, they can produce their bagels for less money, which makes it more likely that they'll stay in business and that I'll have these fabulous bagels to feed my kids. So it's just a win-win situation. And so yes, I do, as long as there is transparency and accountability.
Thank you, Angus.
Jeff, I think your question focused on energy efficiency. And I think that it's a worthwhile debate to have about what is the proper role of the federal government, what should it be doing, and are there things that it's doing that it shouldn't be doing, both in terms of expenditures and tax expenditures through the tax code. And clearly the deficit, which is a huge issue that I think is one of the first issues that has to be confronted in the new Congress if they don't confront it over the next, or during the lame duck session, which I'm not betting on, but it's going to be a huge issue. So that's got to be the context within which we have these discussions. On the other hand, I think a clearly important role for the federal government is supporting research and development. Historically, you go back to the Manhattan Project, and then you go back to DARPA, the Department of Defense, and now in the Department of Energy, there's something called ARPA-E, and to support the development of these technologies that are going to get us out of the problems that we're in. We have to invent our way out, and by definition, new ideas and new practices aren't necessarily going to stand on their own 2 feet. They're going to need some help. And federal R&D support, I think, is one of the most important things that we can do. They're now researching out of the Department of Energy, making a fuel out of algae, developing new ways to build solar panels out of new forms. I visited a company in California called Bloom Energy that makes electricity from a chemical process using natural gas. It's about 35% cleaner. There's no combustion. I don't know how it works. I think it's magic. But I urge you to Google Bloom Energy. It's fascinating. And all of these things supported by research and development funds. And again, I go back to the point about hydrofracking. Energy prices in Maine would be about double what they are today if federal funds hadn't helped to develop that technology 20 years ago.
Thank you. Next round, Cynthia, we'll start with you, and I'll go back to nuclear, only this time nuclear waste. You said on your website that you're open to more nuclear power if the waste issue is managed. So the question is, where and how should nuclear waste and spent fuel that are sitting at sites like Wiscasset around the country be stored?
I have no idea, and that's why I oppose nuclear energy until we're able to solve this storage problem. In my thought, it's a nice idea that we would develop nuclear energy, but the problem is, right now, there's no solution to nuclear waste. And so until there's a solution, in my mind, it's off the table.
Would you put Yucca Mountain back on the table?
Would I put what?
Yucca Mountain back on the table?
I'm not sure, frankly. And I would just like to say...
Check with Harry Reid.
I don't know what it means. I'm not sure what your question means. I'm happy to talk about Yucca Mountain, but given my time constraints, I would just like to say there's been talk about deficits by both of my formidable and respectable opponents. But I would say, let's get real. You can't, on the one hand, talk about the problems that we have with the deficit, and on the other hand, support the continuation of tax cuts for millionaires and billionaires, and refuse to say that you're going to tax anything. That equation just doesn't mix. So if deficits are the problem, then we need to address what's causing the deficits, and that are the continuation of tax cuts, which both of my opponents support, or reasonable sources of revenue. Tax on carbon or tax on gas, in my view, would be a reasonable revenue source. So yes, the deficit's a problem, but let's get real about the solutions and be specific about what we're going to do to reduce it.
Angus, your position on nuclear power, nuclear waste storage and permanent storage?
Well, the first thing to say about nuclear power is it's incredibly expensive. It's way higher than just about anything else. Wind, solar. A new nuclear power plant is incredibly expensive. The last one that anybody even tried to build was Seabrook 2 down in New Hampshire. As I recall, back in the 80s, the projected price was something like 12 to 13 cents a kilowatt hour. which is above anything else. So nuclear power is very expensive, and that folds in significant subsidies. So that's one problem. That's just a practical problem. The second problem is the waste. It bothers me that we're going to do a technology, or start doing again a technology, where just like in the 50s, people said, "Don't worry, we know how to handle the waste." And here we are 50 years later, and sitting down there in Wisconsin with these giant concrete tree stumps full of hot stuff that's going to be toxic for 10,000 years because the country has been unable to muster either the political or the financial will to do anything with it. So in effect, we have about 100 high-level nuclear waste sites scattered all over the country, which is terrible public policy. So between the cost and the disposal of the waste, I just don't think it's a practical alternative.
If you were senator, would you call for one central permanent waste repository?
Well, I think that makes so much more sense than having 100 of them in terms of security, but as the experience with Yucca Mountain demonstrated, it's going to be very, very difficult to find such a place where you're going to be able to convince the people of that state that this is something they should do. I think it's, well, nothing's unsolvable, but I think the practical, Yucca Mountain was studied for 20 years, and ever since there's been a presidential primary in Nevada, that's the end of it.
Charlie, your position on storage of nuclear waste?
Well, I think that Yucca Mountain should be revisited. I think that in my previous statements, I believe that nuclear power is a viable alternative because as Angus rightly pointed out, it is an expensive venture, but I think you have to ask yourself how much energy that can produce, vice wind or something like that. I think that that is the issue that you need to consider as you decide whether or not the country will open more nuclear power plants. In terms of the storage system, I think that the central repository for that does make sense.
Thank you. I'm going to ask another sort of relatively short question. We'll then have our second interactive question, and then we'll go to closing statements. I just want to give you the heads up. Angus, we'll start with you on answering this one. There was a bill this session in the U.S. Senate for essentially a national clean energy standard. A number of states, including Maine, have renewable portfolio standards or renewable energy standards. And the question is, would you support or oppose next session a national clean or renewable energy standard modeled after the states? Why or why not?
I probably would not support it simply because it would be a one-size-fits-all standard that would apply all over the country. We could pass a 30% renewable standard and Maine would meet it today. In fact, we met it 20 years ago. 50% of our electricity comes from renewables right now. But Indiana might have a very hard time with that because they don't have, water doesn't run downhill, they don't have hydro potential. I don't know what they have in the way of wind potential, they don't have biomass. So I think it would work a real hardship on some areas of the country, and that's why I'm not sure that a nationwide one-size-fits-all standard from Washington would be the right answer.
Okay, Charlie?
Well, I hope that Angus's position on this is a direct result of his experience in mandating a 30% renewable energy portfolio. And he's seen that it doesn't work here in Maine, and it drives the cost of energy up, and it drives businesses out of the state, and drives jobs out of the state. I think that it's nice to consider, but again, I think we need to go with what works, and certainly we need to look and research new energy policies, of course, but to mandate it, I think, is the wrong approach.
Cynthia?
There's absolutely no evidence that Maine's renewable portfolio standard has driven Maine jobs out of the state or increased necessarily the price of energy. You're welcome. In fact, Maine has the lowest cost of energy in New England. Now, that's not lower than other parts of the country, but it's certainly low with respect to our neighbors. I would support the National Clean Energy Standard as long as it did take into account regional needs. I do think that the federal government's role in providing fuel efficiency standards and other standards nationally not only provides predictability for businesses and communities and states, but makes interstate business easier, and I think it's something that we can strive toward as a way to, on the path to energy independence and reducing our dependence on fossil fuel.
Thank you. And then on the second interactive round, again, if you could ask a question that would say be generally in the energy, environmental, technology, R&D field would be appreciated by the audience, would be Cynthia to Charlie, Charlie to Angus, Angus to Cynthia. So Cynthia, do you have a question for Charlie?
Well, getting back to this nuclear waste issue, I mean, what is your strategy for storing nuclear waste, and where do you suggest it be stored?
Well, I mentioned just a second ago that I think that we should revisit Yucca Mountain. I think that we do need a central repository. I also mentioned earlier in my remarks, it's my understanding that France is beginning to recycle spent rods on site. So there, if in fact that technology is able to work, then there would be no reason to transfer beyond the location of the reactor.
Thank you, Charlie. We have a question for Angus.
Sure. I think in a larger general area, particularly northern Maine, I'm wondering if Angus supports a national park in northern Maine.
No.
Okay, Angus, do you have a question of Cynthia?
I was once asked a question in law school. I said yes, and the professor said a shorter and more accurate answer would have been no. I gave the shortest possible answer.
Do you have a question for Cynthia?
Cynthia, do you support the park?
I support, there's a proposal to give Maine 70,000 acres of privately owned land and $40 million to create an endowment that would lead to the country's 59th national park on the 100th anniversary of the National Park Service. And as Maine's next United States Senator, I would certainly support studying the feasibility of that proposal in an area of our state that has unemployment in excess of 20% at some levels, and certainly given all the economic reporting and study and analysis demonstrating jobs and opportunities for businesses associated with national parks.
Thank you. We're now going to go to our 2-minute closing statements, and we'll be coming in reverse order and coming back down the table this way. So Cynthia, you're up first.
This is my closing statement?
Yes.
Wow, the morning went by really fast.
It
It's
does.
been a pleasure to be here today. I'm so pleased to finally be talking about something other than ads and holes in money. When it comes to this election, as you can see, there's so much at stake. There are so many important decisions and important votes that your next United States Senator will cast, and I hope that I have earned your support when it comes to energy and the environment. I'm the strongest candidate. I have a record of creating and voting for policies that have been leading to Maine's energy independence, and I will continue that work in Washington. I'm the only candidate who is being straight on my position when it comes to the Keystone Pipeline. I'm the only candidate who supports a realistic approach to our deficit and providing concrete, specific policies on how to address it. And I believe that I represent a new generation of leadership in Washington, that my very respectful and nice opponents are unfortunately a mirror image of the status quo, and that what we really need to shake up Washington is a progressive, democratic woman. And so I hope that you will continue to stay engaged and keep an open mind, and ultimately in November, vote for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Charlie.
Jeff, thank you again for the opportunity to be here this morning. I think that when you consider the really critical issues facing this country, it's going to be very, very important to have a United States Senator who has both a breadth and depth of experience that they can go to Washington and be effective on the first day. You know, I run small businesses in Maine. I started my business career in Bangor, at the Bangor Motor Inn, and then later managed hotels here in South Portland. I run my own small business in Biddeford. I've gone through the experiences of not only having to borrow money and put your house up, but to pay that money back, and to understand what it means to have energy costs directly affect your business, have costs of health insurance affecting your business, have costs of employees, taxes, and regulations. I think that those experiences are critically important. I've certainly worked on the federal level, in the Senate, when I worked for Senator Snow. I've served in the military in Iraq, Afghanistan. I think the next United States Senator is going to have, it's going to be critically important that they have that experience. It's certainly one thing to say that we support the troops. I think we all support the troops. It's a very different thing to have direct experience in those theaters of operation and direct experience with those who are coming back to this country suffering from traumatic brain injuries, suffering from PTSD, veterans employment issues. Those are issues I think that will be facing this state, considering the fact that we have the fourth highest percentage of veterans in the country. You know, I've also worked in the Small Business Administration. I understand the need for access to capital, counseling, and training for not only Maine's but America's entrepreneurs, and I believe that that experience will serve me well. I've been a single father. I understand the issues facing single parents and the difficulties that they faced when I lost my first wife. I think that when you add all of the experiences together, it is important that the next United States Senator is someone who reflects the people that he wants to represent. And I'm talking about the working people of this state, the farmers, the truck drivers, the nurses, the people that work at Walmart, the people that get up every single day and send their kids to school. They go to work, they hurry home, make dinner, get their kids to bed, get them fed, and get them up and do it again. Those are the people that I want to represent. Those are the people that I will represent as the next United States Senator, and I would appreciate your support and your consideration. Thank you.
Angus.
Jeff, I want to talk about something we haven't talked about today and put it in the context of today's discussion. A couple of years ago, I was invited to make a presentation over at Bates about Ed Muskie's environmental leadership. And in the context of preparing for that, I did some research about the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, and I discovered an absolutely astonishing fact. In fact, Mary was in the room, I laughed out loud, I said, come here, you gotta look at this. The Clean Air Act, one of the most important pieces of legislation of the 20th century, one of the most controversial, one of the most far-reaching, affected industry, the automobile industry, the power industry, everybody else in the country, enormously important piece of legislation, passed the United States Senate unanimously. In the midst of the debate, Howard Baker, the Republican leader, gave his proxy to Muskie on an important amendment. That tells you something when you compare it to today about what problems we face in this country. We've been talking about solutions and problems and issues for the last hour and a half, but you can't ever get to the solutions if the system itself doesn't work. And a reporter the other day put a microphone in my face and said, give me 30 seconds on why you're running. And I thought a couple seconds and I said, I'm running for the mirror image of the reason Olympia Snow left. Because she said, I can't get anything done. The system is broken. And here's a person with experience, seniority, membership in a major party, all the qualities of a great legislator, and she served the state so well. And the system drove her out. And I think we have to try it a different way. And that's why I'm in this. That's why I'm running as an independent. Because I think we need to change the way the place functions. Can I do it by myself? Of course not. I'm not arrogant enough or naive enough to think that. But we've got to start somewhere. And when I described it to a fellow the other day, he said, I get it. He said, you want to be the first pole in a new tent. And I think that's a pretty good image of what I'm trying to do. Now, a guy up north put it a little more succinctly. He said, all my life, I've wanted a chance to vote for none of the above. And you're it. So, think about the Clean Air Act passing unanimously and the fact that those characters couldn't agree on the time of day unanimously today. We've got to start to make some beginning on changing this poisonous culture. that I think is just killing us, and we're not going to be able to get to any of these problems, whether they're health, energy, deficit, environment, and we've got to try to move something forward and do it a different way, and that's why I decided to take up this cause. Thank you.
Thank you.